Welcome to Shop Talk Live, Fine Woodworking Magazine's bi-weekly podcast. I'm your host and Fine Woodworking editor, Tom McKenna, and with me are regulars Executive Art Director Mike Pekovich.
Hey, guys.
And Special Projects Editor Matt Kenny.
Howdy, everyone.
Good to be here today. As always, before we get started, I need to take care of some important business. Just want to let you know that this episode of Shop Talk Live is sponsored by Highland Woodworking. Shop online at highlandwoodworking.com and find all the brands you know and love to use in your shop, as well as many unique tools you haven't heard about yet. Family owned and operated since 1978, Highland has a friendly, experienced staff who are always ready to answer your questions. And right now, Highland is offering a free $199 value SawStop accessory upgrade when you buy a SawStop Professional Cabinet Saw. Don't miss out on this limited time opportunity to save at highlandwoodworking.com.
I wonder if that $199 value is like a membership to the Hot Dog of the Month Club. Like a 3-year membership to this. Yeah, maybe not. Not an appropriate joke?
Probably not. All right. Hey, before getting to the questions, I wanted to talk a little bit about a recent letter that I got regarding a technique that we showed in the magazine. And this person writes, I set about making the two-walled box described in Fine Woodworking 250 article, Beautiful Bandsaw Boxes. That was by Michael Cullen. Being a beginner, I followed the illustrated instructions carefully. Mr. Cullen advises, with the bandsaw table still angled, saw off the waste piece at the lower end of the plug, then take a second slice to make the bottom of the box. Last, cut a slice off the top of the plug. And these 3 cuts are illustrated with a photo, he says. And this person writes, in my attempt to do exactly what is illustrated, the saw blade dug in, the plug rotated downward to the table, jammed, kicked back the plug, and badly bruised my thumb. I respectfully switched off the machine and counted my fingers. And it's an important technique thing to note. Both Matt and I made bandsaw boxes based on that article, and I made the two-walled box as well, but I didn't have the same problem. But I think it's something we didn't reinforce in the magazine about the technique was the importance of keeping the workpiece engaged with the table as it entered the blade.
Right. Anytime you cut something curved, like on the bandsaw that's not a flat surface that sits flat on the table,
right?
The whatever's being cut, right in front of the blade and in the blade, that has to be on the table.
Because if it doesn't start there, it's going to end up there really quick.
Yeah, because the cutting force of a bandsaw is straight down. Right. Yeah.
So this is like a football shape. So that point was...
He probably had it up in the air.
Okay.
Yeah, and as soon as it caught, I'm sure it went right down. And if you watch any of the Sam Maloof videos from way back when, or watch the photographs of him sculpting those crazy legs that he made, you look and he's always got that workpiece down against the table where it's right against the blade. So it's an important thing to remember. And didn't you talked to Michael about this, didn't you, Matt?
Yeah, when I was in Michael's shop a couple of weeks ago, we were doing a video workshop on these bandsaw boxes, and I think that comes out in another month or two. But I talked to Michael about this, and I've cut on the bandsaw the way we showed in the magazine, and it is safe as long as you keep the part what's being cut right in front of the blade on the table. So for this thing, you got to kind of have to curve it as it roll it through, so to speak. Well, Michael gave an alternate way to do this if you're not uncomfortable doing that, which I have to admit, it probably takes some experience at the bandsaw to get comfortable doing that.
That little rolly curvy thing.
Little rolly, yeah. So what he suggested doing is that at this stage of making the box, you've cut out the interior, the inside, and the outside of the box is still flat and square. So you actually can take one of the sides of it, the off-cut side, so to speak, what's going to become the outside,
right,
and turn it over so the flat side is on the table and use it like a cradle.
Oh, nice.
And if you do that, the blade should be 90 degrees to the table when you do that.
Right.
What Michael did in the article, when he cut the lid keeper and the bottom free from that plug, the table was still tilted, angled over. So if you tilt the table back to 90 degrees and then try to cut that plug,
it's going to be at an angle, right?
Yeah, not only will you have the issue of trying to roll it through, but also the angle's the plug is tapered, so you're kind of holding it up and only having a tiny little point on the table.
Right.
So if you're going to do it without the cradle, the table should be left angled, and that's what it says in the article. And cut it. Then you have the full width or the height of the plug on the table, and as you roll it through, or switch over and use the offcut as a cradle and tilt the table back to 90 degrees.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Oh, cool.
Glad that's settled. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a problem. I think sometimes the magazine makes things look too easy. And those projects looked super simple, and they were, but, it's that one thing that, experienced people know. And I think it's something that we encounter with our authors when we go on photo shoots, and, they know what they're doing, and they have all these set methods of working. And you go and you see them do something that they do every day, and you're like, oh, that's really cool. And they're like, well, I just do this every day. But they never talk about it. It's all part of their muscle memory. So it's
just, if we accurately conveyed the difficulty of the craft in the magazine, no one would do it.
No. It'd be like putting in woodworking is inherently dangerous on the headlines.
Yeah, title of every article is woodworking is inherently dangerous. You might lose a finger.
All right, let's get to some questions. The first one comes from Jonathan Howe, and Jonathan writes, when working on table saws of 1 3/4 horsepower or lower, is there any reason not to use thin curved blades exclusively when doing through cuts? No.
All right,
let's move on.
No, in fact, I think Raleigh Johnson even recommended keeping a thin curved blade in your saw if you're using like a sort of a mid-powered 1 3/4
anything
horse
under
saw.
3 horsepower. Yeah.
And that said, I have a 3-horse unisaw, and I've had a regular full thickness woodworker 2 blade from Forrest in there forever. I also have one from Ridge, and that's what I always use. I think I had a bad experience with a thin curved blade cutting, just skimming cuts on really thick stock, and the blade seemed to deflect a little bit. So I've never used thin curved blades since that. But a while back, I got a couple blades in to do like a little tools and materials review on a couple Freud blades, and I tested the full curve Freud blade, and it was like, well, yeah, this is fine, but I never actually ended up using it after that. It's decent, but I never picked it up. But then I needed a thin curved blade. I was making a lot of little strips, and I wanted to save some waste in between the strips. So I remembered I had this thin curved blade around, and I put that in just specifically for that. And it cut so much better that's actually in my saw probably 50 or 60% of the time now. So I'm kind of sold. I think I'm sort of sold on the fact that the thin curved blade, it cuts easier, there's less waste, it's more efficient, and I don't know, I'm kind of liking it.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I use them off and on. I have a couple of different brands of them in my shop, and they're fantastic. And Raleigh, I remember when I did that article with Raleigh, I edited it, and I remember was skeptical going into it. He was like, these things deflect, et cetera, et cetera. But we tested them, and I mean, they cut just as well as full curved blades.
Yeah,
or standard curved blades, I should say. And so there's no reason not to use one.
Yeah.
The only problem I had is I don't have a riving knife with my saw because it's an older saw. So I have the throat plates, and I glue like a little, tongue depressor sized tab behind the blade.
Yes.
But that thing was sized for my full curved blade. So the first rip cut that I was pushing, it got harder and harder to push. And I thought, why is it so hard to push? And I realized it was just skinny enough for the curve to fit into that little splitter, but thick enough to make it really hard. So I think the first time, I sort of manned up and pushed it all the way through because I was like freaked out. What do I do? Turn the blade off because you couldn't back it up or anything.
Right.
So I've since got out my shoulder plane and thinned up that guy just a little bit.
Yeah,
that's a good solution. And most, modern saws have, 2 riving knives, one for standard blades and the other for thin curve.
Or the
Well,
comes
they're
with
all
one that's
yeah.
just for, they can accommodate both.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that,
Oh.
yeah, it can thin or standard curve.
Cool. All right. Well, this is moving along really fast. Let's jump into segment number 1. It's time for our all-time favorite technique of all time for this week. And Matt, do you want to hit it off?
Sure. So mine has to do with cutting rabbets at the table saw using a dado set. And the standard technique for this, which I learned watching Norm Abram on New Yankee Workshop, is that you put a sacrificial fence on your rip fence, and you set up a dado stack that is wider than your rabbet is going to be.
Okay.
And you bury part of the blade in the sacrificial fence, and then you run your piece along it. You cut the rabbet, right?
Yes.
Yep.
I mean, that part is fairly easy because you can measure for the width of the rabbet and have that set, have your rip fence set perfectly for the width of the rabbet before you turn the saw even on.
Right.
The more pain in the neck part of doing it is getting the depth of the rabbet correct, or how high the blade needs to be above the saw table, right? And the way that I've done it always in the past, and probably everyone else has done it, is to get it close and then slowly dial it in, right?
Multiple cuts,
Multiple cuts.
check in with your combo square.
Right,
Yep.
right. So what I recently figured out is that before I put that sacrificial fence on, is I take a combo square, or I actually have this similar thing from Lee Valley, which is like 3 inches wide. I think they call it a cabinet maker square,
Oh, yes, right.
which is I find easier to track along an edge of a board and keep your pencil there. So I just set that thing to the depth of my rabbet and just draw a pencil line down the sacrificial fence piece. Put it on the fence, set the width, and then raise the blade. And when the blade hits the pencil line, boom, you're done. It's exactly at the height it should be at. No test cuts, nothing. And then you just run the piece over it, and it cuts a perfect rabbet without any test cuts.
Well, that's cool.
Good golly.
Yeah, so that works awesome.
Awesome. Now, do you find typically what I'll do is when I am burying the blade in, is I'll actually raise the blade up a little bit higher than the cut and then back down to give it a little bit of clearance. But this method, you're running the blade at maximum elevation, so you've got almost no clearance between the wood. That doesn't bind or burn or anything like that.
No, there's no burning or anything.
Okay.
I'm not. So you're saying you would take it higher than the
Just like a pinch higher, then come
And
back
then come back
down,
down.
just to leave that little bit of clearance room.
Yeah, and that's
clearance of what for what?
Just between the blade and your sacrificial fence stock.
Oh yeah, no, there was no burning.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I followed Mike's method, but I do it just because it's easier for me, at least, to back down as opposed to raise it up to dial in the fit, dial in the rabbet. But
Well, here's my new improved method.
awesome.
Because I used to do that, bring the fence over, bring the blade into the fence until Matt convinced me that's stupid. Because you have all these little half moon arcs in your fence and you have to replace it. And Matt taught me to clamp on your fence just slightly above where the blade is going to go.
Right.
So I like your method of the mark and raise, but I like your other method of having the fence too high. So the next time, I'm going to forget this, but it will be my favorite technique the next time I do this. I'm going to attach my fence a little above the final position of the blade, but then I'm going to spring clamp on a little piece of 1/4 inch MDF with my height scribed to that, put it over there, raise my blade into that, take it off.
Yeah.
Best of all worlds.
Yeah. So
all time, right?
The little half moons that you cut into the sacrificial fence, which makes it. I mean, basically, as you go from one to the other, that you can't really reuse that section.
Oh, I do all the time, and it's not good.
Yeah, because you don't want your workpiece dipping into a higher,
Right.
higher cutout. So what I have switched to, and this works for me because a lot of, I'm not working with 8 foot long pieces. Maybe a piece that's maybe 2 to 3 feet long at the most.
Right.
is instead of making a sacrificial fence that is like 40 inches long, which is, like as long as my rip fence is, I make one that's like 20 inches long. And then I usually use 3/4 inch MDF. And that gives me, at least 1, 2, 3, 4 uses before I chuck it. And you're using up...
meaning you could do it once, rotate it,
use it
once, flip it once, flip and rotate once.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yep.
And you get 4 uses out of it. And really, you don't need to... you don't really need to have a long sacrificial fence. It only needs to have a little bit of guidance before the blade and some guidance after the blade. Okay. So, like 20 inches is long enough, I've found.
Cool.
And that's when I do that. That's what I do. But I also do it the other way, where you talk about you have the sacrificial fence just higher. You don't actually cut into it. It's it's just over the blade, but low enough that where you still get the workpiece bears against it.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's cool.
How about you, Mike?
Well, I stole this week's favorite all-time technique of this week from Instagram, from a post by Tim Russo, who's been posting a lot and has been doing really, really cool stuff. He did a really quick 15-second video on his tips for gluing up thin panels. And he had a pair of tips. One was he uses those Bessey parallel jaw clamps, the red plastic jaws. But instead of having them sitting upright with the jaws facing up, he laid them flat. So he's resting this thin stock, maybe 1/2 inch thick, flat on the bars, and the jaws stick up only about 1/2 inch, so you're basically clamping on the sides of the jaws that way. That was really cool. I thought, okay, that's nice. I like that. He put glue on the boards, laid them down, and just before he started tightening up the clamps, he had those binder clips, and he clamped each little binder clip at each joint in the panel. He had like a 4 board, so he had 3 clips on each side. He clamped right at the joint to hold those boards nice and flat to each other before he tightened up the clamps. And it was like so quick and brilliant, and I never thought to do anything like that. And I'm definitely going to steal that. So that's my favorite technique of all time.
That's cheeky. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a woodworking all-time favorite technique of the week. I've been I've been absent from my shop, I have to admit, because I'm redoing a bathroom. But I did learn the past 2 weeks how to put up ceramic tile and how to put down subflooring and linoleum tile, and I'm learning all about plumbing. So that's where my head is at.
Yeah, and when you're on Fine Home Building's new podcast, you can talk all about that stuff.
Yeah, I'm not going to bore this audience with that. But, it's a good experience. It's cool. It's cool to learn new tools and techniques, and I learned how to use a tile saw, which was fun. So, but I'm not going to bore our audience with that.
So
kind
your
of stuff.
technique of the week is, for any home improvement, talk to Patrick McComb from Fine Home Building.
Yes, absolutely.
1-800-HELP-PATRICK.
Yes.
Yes.
Guy's awesome.
He is unbelievable. Yeah, so, he's fantastic.
All right, well, let's get back to some important questions. This one is from Brandon, and Brandon says, I'm a beginning woodworker, and I'm looking for some advice on jointing lumber. I currently rent, and the garage doesn't have 220 volt outlet, so it can't go any bigger than a 6-inch jointer. My next project will be a dining room table. Below are options I am considering: purchase a 6-inch joiner and then purchase a hand plane for lumber that's wider than 6. Skip the joiner until I have my own place, and for now invest in a rabbit block plane, a number 4 smooth plane, a number 7 jointer plane, and a card scraper. If you guys have any other suggestions, I would love to hear them. And I think Patrick he's going to come back and haunt us on this one, right, Matt?
Right, because I verified this one with him. We thought this was correct, and Patrick confirmed it for us. We just wanted someone outside of the magazine to tell us we're not idiots. Which he did still say we're idiots, but he said we're right about this. Because if I am willing to bet, I don't know, it's very likely that your home or apartment, he says he has a garage, it must be a home, he's renting a home.
Yep.
That there is a place to put a clothes dryer. And all clothes dryers run off 220 volt circuits.
Unless they're gas, but yeah.
Unless they're gas, yeah. So, you probably most people have gas ones, right? I mean, electric ones, I think. So all you have to do, you can get an 8-inch joiner,
And if you don't, call the landlord and say, can you please wire this for
A dryer.
an electric dryer?
Yes. And
Yes.
then
There
you'll
you
put a
go.
dryer in.
Yes.
And then you'll have a 220/240 circuit for your 8-inch joiner.
Yep.
Or whatever joiner you want to get. And joiners don't always, big machines don't normally come with a plug already on them. Or they do come with the plug, but you can go to Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever and buy an outlet, a receptacle to match it. Mm-hmm. And so even if you have to go and buy a dryer cord, you
Yes.
can, somehow hook up the dryer cord to your jointer and use that to plug it into the outlet, and away you go.
Yeah, that's a better solution than going small and then regretting it.
Yeah, that's the two options. He should definitely. I would not buy a 6-inch joiner looking to replace it later.
Yeah. In fact, the first house I moved into, I had already had all my machines and everything. They'd been in storage. And before I got my garage rewired, we had a washer and dryer in there. I did that exact same thing. I cut the little plug off of my table saw cord, went to the hardware store to get a plug that matched my dryer thing, wired it up with no experience doing this whatsoever. And it worked, and so, yeah, we're fine. But I agree. It's really tough to get locked into a smaller capacity tool because it's so hard to upgrade from that later.
Yeah.
Right.
It's expensive. And you can't sell a 6-inch joiner, I know from experience.
I will one day, this is somewhat on topic, I will one day bust out my all-time favorite story about Mike Pekovich, which involves drywall.
On
One
the
day-
table saw.
Don't do it.
In the table saw.
No.
One day, Mike.
I heard about this because I had suggested that to Patrick and he laughed.
It works really well if you want a clean cut.
Well, I should confess something that I know I'm going to get hammered on. But when I was putting down my linoleum tile in the bathroom, trying to, I was fitting and scribing these little squares, and I was using my bandsaw to cut them.
Oh, yeah.
It worked fine.
If it works, yeah.
It worked.
You
and
back it up with some plywood or something.
No, I just cut it.
Oh,
okay. And it was great because I used the fence and no harm, no foul. And I was even able to do some circular cutouts for the toilet bowl. So it's all good, right?
For the what?
Toilet bowl.
Okay. All right. We got any more questions?
Hey, you can tell we're recording in the afternoon, can't you? Hey, it's time. This is a new segment, and this should be a good one. It's time for our all-time favorite methods of work of all time for this week. And I know we have a very good selection of stuff. Do you want to roll it out, Mike?
Sure. So Methods of Work, for anyone not familiar with the magazine, is a long-running sort of tips department that's been in the magazine for 40 years. Little hand-drawn little tips. People send in ideas from their shop and all this. They range from the very simple to the rather complex and overthought. Mine is probably, well, it is. It's not only the best Methods of Work tip of all time of the week, but of all time ever. In fact, I claim dibs on this because it's so brilliant. What you do, if you have a shoe and it's a little bit worn out.
There's not.
First, step one, get a shoe.
Yeah. Who has a shoe? God, Mike.
Get a shoe.
Why don't you, this is only for the extremely wealthy.
You nail it to a wall, and you put your files in it. Issue 15, right there. Fine Woodworking Magazine.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
They should have just stopped Methods of Work after that.
They should have. And I love that. I was doing one of our special publications where we do these newsstand collections of topic specific, and one was on shop tips, and I tried getting that shoe one into that issue, and the editor at the time said no freaking way. I said, but everyone's got a shoe, right?
Yes.
It's almost as good as the classic. We get it probably once or twice a year, where someone's got a basement workshop, and they say, "What do you do with your old peanut butter jars?" Or it could be any kind of jar with a screw-on lid. You screw the lid to the joist, and then you can put stuff in the jar, and you screw it on, and you got all these jars hanging down from the joist.
Yeah. Got a workbench in my basement that was there when we moved in, and underneath, look like a million, tubes from an old TV set, but all these jars hanging down, with their little tops screwed to the underside of the bench.
Well, it's Yankee ingenuity.
Absolutely.
What about you, Matt?
My favorite all-time MOW? Well, my memory of MOW is not so great as Mike's, who's sort of like Rain Man when it comes to things like that. But mine actually, so I was looking through some issues and I came across one that I do really like, and it's because I've seen it lots of times in person, and it's one that Chris Gochner submitted.
Yeah.
And I have been to Chris's shop for photography many times now, like 5 or 6 times, and he always pulls this little gizmo out and uses it. And Chris has a old school cast iron face vise,
yep.
Like a record style vise, and which are good vices. But the problem with them is that if you need to clamp something on one side, the vise will rack.
Yes,
everybody is familiar with that.
Yep.
So Chris came up with a really cool wedge. So it's just a block of wood that's tapered on one long face, and then he has glued to it onto the top of it. So is a thin piece of wood that acts like a stop. So you can put this wedge down in your vise, and the thin piece acts like a stop to keep it up above the vise. But then the wedge allows you to always have it like the off side of the vise at the same width as the side that you're using to clamp something. So you get equal clamping pressure on both sides of the screw, and you get no racking.
Yeah, I remember. It's funny. Chris, again, I'm with you, Matt, where you go to his shop, and he's always pulling things out from under his bench that are brilliant. And he pulled that out on one of my photo shoots, and I said, "What the heck is that?" And he described it, and I said, "Dude, that's a winning methods of work tip right there." So he was happy to submit it. That is a really good one.
But my favorite thing that he pulls out all the time whenever I go there
Easy
is like toffee. Right? He always has like snacks. It's fantastic.
Yeah, sometimes he'll have donuts.
Donuts, yeah.
And I remember Tom Begnall, one of our former editors, used to always whine that whenever he went out to see Chris, he never got donuts, but every time I went out, Chris would be there with a bag of donuts from the shop down the block.
Yeah. He always has really good snacks.
Okay.
One of the perks of the job.
Yeah.
Hey,
well, some places you go, they don't have snacks. They're like, here's a Slim Jim.
I've never been offered a Slim Jim by an author, but
you don't go to the South.
Maybe someday. My favorite method of work of all time of this week was I discovered it when I was on a photo shoot at Mike's shop, and Mike has, I think, a Delta 14-inch bandsaw.
Yes,
and
yep.
We were taking some photos there, and I noticed he had tennis balls on the fences of his bandsaw. And I was like, what the heck is that all about? And I thought that was kind of weird.
His shoes.
That's right. And so, I took all the photos I needed. I came back and I asked him about it. He said, oh, yeah, I got that from Methods of Work. And sure enough, yeah, here it is. What issue was it? From 1998. And I used it on my 14-inch saw where I had the L bracket fence. And then when I upgraded to my newer bandsaw, I had less of a problem with that, so I wound up putting the tennis balls on my barbell, the ends of my barbell, so I didn't hit my hips anymore.
But the tennis balls, you put them on the fence rails so that you don't bump into them and
bonk your hip,
bonk your head,
bonk your hip or whatever.
Yeah, those rails stick out a good
quite a bit.
6 or 8 inches beyond the table, and it's right at hip bone height.
Yeah.
Especially that little L bracket one in the back.
Yeah.
Brutal.
The good thing is for both of you guys, in a few more years, you'll be able to take them off your fence rails and put them on the bottom of your walker, so that you'll have tennis balls on the bottom of your walker.
That's fantastic. Well, moving on. Hey, the reason we did this special segment, I don't think we'll be, maybe we'll do it down the road, but it might be a different title. With our 40th anniversary, we have, it's been a party. We've been celebrating the traditions and what we do here and celebrating the craft and the people behind it. But we're losing one of our key people. Jim Richey, the Methods of Work illustrator and editor, is hanging up the pen and pencil this with this issue, with the one that's coming out, 254. So we're going to give him a call and talk to him and wish him happy trails and kind of get to know him a little bit more. I don't think he's one of these great people that is behind the scenes, but nobody ever knows him.
But he's been illustrating the methods of work for like
36 years.
36 years, yeah.
And so I'm sure he's got some good stories. But Jim is he's always been a pro. I worked with him a few times when I did methods of work, and he was always on time, always a great person, and we're really going to miss him a lot. So let's get him on the phone and wish him well. All right, so now on the line with us today is veteran illustrator and editor of Methods of Work, Jim Richie, who is retiring this year. So, hey, Jim, how are you?
I'm doing great.
With me on the podcast is Mike Pekovich, the art director.
Hey, Jim, how are you doing?
Hi, Mike.
And we have Matt Kenny, which I don't know if you've ever met Matt, but he's been here a while.
Yeah, no, we've actually never met or spoken. How are you, Jim?
Hey,
Bye, Matt.
with your exit with the current issue, we just wanted to get you on the phone and say thank you and talk a little bit about how you basically created this column and this whole tips and techniques with us. And just one, start off taking a step back. How did you get into woodworking? Was it fine woodworking that inspired you, or were you doing it before you got that first issue?
Well, back in the 1950s and 60s when I went to school here in Oklahoma, it was a requirement that you take a shop class.
Wow.
Of course, that's gone by the wayside.
Yeah.
And so in junior high, then they called it junior high then, not middle school, I took a shop class, a required shop class, and I enjoyed it. And so in high school, I actually elected to take a shop class rather than all my friends, college-bound friends, were heading to the trig class, and I was going to shop. And I remember making a bongo drum with alternating slices of walnut and maple.
Do you still have it?
So that's kind of how I got in. And then later on, after I got married, my wife bought me a little Sears 8-inch table saw. So that sealed the deal. If you have a table saw, you've got to learn how to be a woodworker.
Exactly. So you got the table saw. What was the next tool purchase you had?
Oh, probably a router.
Yeah. So how long were you doing the woodworking before you took on the methods of work? I mean, you obviously had some illustrating chops. Did you study drawing in high school or college or anything like that? How did you combine the two?
Well, not really. They didn't have art class in high school here, but I did take some oil painting lessons from a local artist.
Wow.
And I'd always had kind of a knack for drawing, although I didn't know how amateurish my drawings were until I started doing work for Fine Woodworking. It was, when Fine Woodworking first came out, the advertisements for it, I jumped right on as an initial subscriber because there was nothing out there. Really, there were no other magazines and very few books on woodworking. So I was hungry to learn how to run that 8-inch Sears table saw. So I signed on, and I was really taken with the magazine. So I submitted a couple of articles and got acquainted with then editor John Kelsey, and he asked me to be a correspondent. I was living in Texas then, and so I became a correspondent. And I don't think either they nor I knew what a correspondent did. But I went to like craft fairs and met and interviewed woodworkers and so on.
Okay.
anyway, as a part of that, I ended up sending in some sketches, and John got in a bind, I think, and asked me if I would help temporarily with the methods column, which they had just started.
Wow.
A couple of issues before. So I agreed to do that, and then it sort of kept going from there.
Just evolved. Well, that's really cool. I mean, I actually thought you were, when I first started, I thought you were the first illustrator, and when I started doing some more work and researching methods of work for various extra publications, it's really interesting how the first iteration of methods of work was a bunch of, I think the authors were sketching themselves, and then once you took hold of it, it really created a nice continuity and a personality of its own, I think.
Well, thanks for saying that. Yes, I looked back through some of the older issues just recently, and I'm really embarrassed by how amateurish the drawings were back then. Fine woodworking, and I remember specifically an art director by the name of Roland Wolf actually taught me how to do perspective drawing.
Wow.
And he would gently, when I would do something wrong, he would let me know in a gentle coaching way, not, so
on the job
it was
training.
really great of Taunton Press and Fine Woodworking to sort of bear with me while I was learning how to draw.
Well, that's a pretty amazing story, because I know Mike has employed you often to do illustrations for us outside of methods of work, and I always thought you were trained as an illustrator and kind of picked up woodworking on the side. So that's an interesting story for me.
You have to say,
no, that's not true. In fact, I had to go buy a book on perspective drawing, to get the fine points of it.
That's brilliant. That's great.
Hey, Jim, this is Matt, and I was going to say that for me, I read the magazine before I started working here about 8 years ago, and when I think about fine woodworking illustration, the first thing that always comes to my mind is your style. Even though there are other illustrators that work for the magazine who I admire, it's your stuff that for me is fine woodworking illustrations.
Yeah,
that's really what I think about.
Well, appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Always felt like the drawings ought to look like they were hand done by the author.
Yeah.
So I hesitate ever to use a ruler or a straight edge or a French curve, and I always try to do it by hand so that you have this little bit of a shaky thing going on that makes it look hand drawn.
Yeah, and
that's good for some things and not so good for others.
Yeah, Jim, you're sort of running the risk of selling yourself way too short on your talents here. So I'll give you my Jim Richie illustration story. And when I first came to the magazine, the art director was Bob Goodfellow, who now heads up Fine Home Building magazine. And traditionally, art directors also did some illustration work for the magazine as well. So I had my first little illustration package, and Bob said, why don't you do something and see if you can do kind of a Jim Richie style? And I looked at your work, and it is a very friendly looking, very hand-drawn looking, and very simple looking on the surface. And so I said, well, yeah, I can, no problem. I can do something like this. So I tried something and showed it to Bob. He goes, no, why don't you try something more Jim Richie looking? And so I gave it 2 or 3 more tries and finally decided, even though the style, it looks very, very simple, it's very, very well crafted. I never did nail it. And sort of since then, I've taken a back seat, and I tend to have folks like you and the other illustrators turn my chicken scratches into real illustrations for me.
Yeah.
So
What's really funny, Jim, going on piggybacking on Mike's comment, I actually think your drawing has your own name. Like, it's when we have some of our meetings about articles and how we want to present them, we'll often say, well, it's a Jim Richie style illustration.
yes.
So you've got your own personal style, and it's really it's been an amazing run, and the the magazine, it's just it's really going to miss your hand drawn touch for sure.
Well, I appreciate you saying that.
Hey, we have a couple other questions regarding your memory about working on the column. Do you have any favorites? We just had a segment where we talked about some of our favorite tips of all time. Do you have any in your mind that stand out as being a favorite, whether for good or bad reason?
Well, you got to remember that there are literally thousands of these tips, over the years. The ones that I've used, that I know I've used the most, one is a sliding cutoff, a crosscut type box for a table saw. And it's just part of the common woodworking language nowadays, to make a sliding crosscut box for a table saw, but that was not the case back in the 70s. And I remember making that and using that for years and years until things like miter saws, compound miter saws came along. They could do the same thing. Another tip that I've used many times is the French cleat type system for hanging things off a wall.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used the little L-shaped buttons for fastening tabletops to, the undercarriage.
Tables, yeah.
I've used that dozens of times, and all of those had their basis. I remember first seeing them, showing up as tips,
Well,
not as work tips.
Here's a quick, I'm sorry.
I always enjoyed the little creative things that people would come up with that you hadn't thought of. Some different use for a tool or something that was universal, but it was very creative and off the wall. Right. Those were the ones that I enjoyed.
And it turns out, we discovered, I discovered when I first started working with you on the column years ago, that you build a lot of these things so you can figure out how to illustrate them. What's the percentage of tips that you have illustrated that you've built? Did you build every one of them?
Well, I would say at least half.
Wow.
It kind of depends on what we get from the author.
Yeah.
If we get a really good photograph or drawing from the author, then we can use that as the basis. But by and large, the stuff we get from the authors is not very usable.
Right.
So then it depends on what it is exactly. If it's a little jig or a little fixture, that I can mock up or build simply in the shop, then I do it. Sometimes it's a huge rack or something that it just is not practical to build, or it uses a tool like a dust collection machine or something like that I don't have.
Right.
But if it's a smallish thing that I can mock up or build, I do that because then I can walk around and look at it from every angle and kind of figure out what's the best way to communicate this to the readers. The best, you get some really odd things where you have to be underneath it actually, to show how it works.
For a minute there, I had the image in my head that Jim's got on his property somewhere a big barn just full of clamp racks that he's had to make.
Well, I do have a clamp rack, and I should mention that clamp racks are my least favorite thing to draw because typically they have a zillion parallel lines, of clamps
right
in the rack, and every one of those parallel lines in my shaky hand, I'm trying to stay parallel to the line next to it. So they're my least favorite things to draw, but we've had dozens and dozens of clamp rack ideas come in over the years.
Oh, I know.
So, Jim, traditionally for illustrators, the human hand is one of the toughest things to draw. In fact, some of our illustrators who do great furniture won't even sort of touch a hand drawing. But you've done a lot of hands throughout the years, and even in your loose style, you've really nailed it. Is that something you had to work on to get good, or is that still something you still struggle with?
Well, I have to work on it, and drawing hands is tricky because to draw a hand, it can't look like a real hand. It has to look it has to take on certain characteristics to be believable. But I didn't draw hands in the beginning, and I've only started doing that in the last few years here.
Interesting.
Just because I didn't have the confidence to do it before.
Yeah.
But some tips need a hand. You need to see the hand in there. The action of the hand is what communicates the tip the best.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, here's the one final big question. Now that Fine Woodworking won't be knocking on your door every other month to make you do some drawings and do some editing, what's in store for you? What are your plans for the future?
Well, I'm at that stage in my life. If I'm ever going to travel, I need to do it now. I'm in my 70s, and so one of these days, I'm going to get too old and decrepit to be able to travel. But right now, I'm still healthy, so I've retired from my oil company job, and now I've retired from you guys. So that opens up the door for traveling and not worrying so much about the schedule every other month. We have a cabin in Colorado, and we go out there for as long as we can, but a couple of months in the summer to get away from the Oklahoma heat.
Yeah.
But then I always needed to make a trip back in August, to work on the column. So now I don't have to worry about that.
You can stay put. Well, we really appreciate everything you've done for us. I think I speak for every editor who basically sat in my seat when I say thank you.
Well, I really appreciate that. I've really enjoyed working with you guys too. That's the part of this that I don't like, is that I've really had a great relationship with all the fellows I've worked with, and actually one girl. So it's that part of it's going to be, and plus the challenge of a package coming in and wondering, it's a challenge to figure out how you're going to put it together.
Yeah. Well,
I'll miss that part.
Well, we'll miss you and your work for sure. So, happy trails.
Well, thank you guys very much.
And
thank you, Jim.
Thanks for thanks for spending a few minutes with us today, Jim. And
sure.
And we'll be
You're
in
welcome.
touch again for sure.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was Jim Richie. A fun conversation. We're really going to miss him. Let's move on to the next question. This one is from John Quinn. And John has been having some trouble with his bandsaw. He says, I've been resawing a lot of red oak boards with my 14-inch bandsaw, and I upgraded it with a riser block and a 1.5 horsepower motor. I've been using 3/4-inch and 1-inch carbide tip blades. I had been getting good results until my old rubber bandsaw tires, which were made with a molded-in crown, wore out or got chewed up by the carbide teeth. I tried replacing the tires, and the carbide would not stay centered. The carbide blade would not stay centered on the wheels at all, and usually thrust forward. Should I try to recrown the tires or buy tires that are crowned? And I think we all sort of realize that maybe it's beyond the tires and it's really the blade that he's using, right, Matt?
Yeah, for a 14-inch bandsaw, even with a riser block, I would say you do not want to use a 3/4-inch or 1-inch bandsaw blade.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have to tension those blades so high that you're actually, stressing the attachment, the wheel attachments, and it tends to
maybe
tilt forward, and that might be why they tend to skate towards the front of the wheel.
Yeah.
I have a carbide tooth blade for my 19-inch bandsaw, and the blade body is thicker than your average bandsaw blade, and they do need more tension. And normally, you don't find them in lengths suitable for a 14-inch bandsaw because they're just not because the diameter of the wheel is too small, and it causes the blade to have to flex too much to get around it, and you can end up with breakage, I think. But I would say you don't really need, just go to like a 1/2-inch blade. And like a high carbon steel for resawing, he said, right? Yeah. So just get like a 1/2-inch blade, 3 teeth per inch, hook tooth, and high carbon steel. And they're inexpensive, and it's not a big deal if they go dull. because they're cheap, as opposed to spending $150, $200 on a carbide tooth blade.
Yeah, much overkill. So, all right. Well, I think it's time to wrap it up for this episode of Shop Talk Live. Tune in again and...
Well, we didn't answer his, but he has to get new tires too.
Oh yeah, we forgot. Get new tires, John.
Yeah, and your tires on a 14-inch bandsaw, it's a lot of times you should look at the wheel, and if the wheel has a crown built into it, then you want to get tires that do not.
Yeah.
If the wheel does not have a crown, then you get tires that do. On a 14-inch bandsaw, I believe that's correct. Mike?
Yeah, I'm trying to think which is which.
I'm not sure.
Because I don't know if my old saw was flat and I had a crown tire, or if my Grizzly saw is crown, so it has flat tires. But you're right, it's one or the other.
I mean, the bigger the bandsaw gets, at least in my experience, the less crown the wheel has. Like my 19-inch bandsaw has very little crown to the wheel.
Right.
But on a 14-inch bandsaw, you want a little bit of crown. So you got to figure out one way or the other. Look at the wheel and see if it has any crown built into it.
Then good luck replacing it. I know it can be a pain in the butt to put tires on.
Yeah, and the bottom line, if you have a 14-inch saw with a riser block, it's not really designed to be doing full-time heavy-duty resawing.
Correct.
You can do it on occasion, but it's almost not the right tool for it. So you are pushing it to its limits to be doing that as often as it sounds like you're doing.
Especially at a 12-inch height, like the full height capacity. If you're doing, resawing 4 to 6 inches, no big deal. But if you're resawing oak boards at 12 inches, you're going to kill the bandsaw.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're long lengths too, so there's a lot of stress going on there. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, now...
So just send that wood to Newtown, Connecticut, and we'll take care of it.
As long as it's not red oak.
Well, I like rips on red oak.
Or a quarter sawn red oak.
Gorgeous.
Yeah,
take that all day long.
I thought you didn't like red oak.
Snob.
Man. I'm not the snob. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Shop Talk Live. Tune in again in 2 weeks on April 1st for our next episode. And by the way, folks, we need your questions. It makes the show. So send them as well as your comments to shoptalk@taunton.com. That's shoptalk@taunton.com. Please spread the word about Shop Talk Live to your woodworking friends and neighbors. You can catch the podcast via iTunes. And while you're there, please give us the all-powerful 5-star rating. You can also stream the podcast on the web at www.shoptalklive.com or catch us on iHeartRadio. Finally, visit findwoodworking.com to keep up with the exciting tool giveaway for our 40th anniversary. Their current prize is a set of Lee Nielsen socket chisels.
What?
Fancy.
Socket
Five chisels? Socket chisels.
Socket chisels. Socket to me.
Socket to me.
That was like socket wrenches. It's like, what are you talking about?
Lee Nielsen has socket wrenches now.
Yeah, nice.
And they're very sharp. To win them, you must enter by March 22nd. To enter, go to findwoodworking.com/40 sweeps. And that's the number 40. Finally, keep up with Find Woodworking on Instagram and on Facebook, and look for Matt, Mike, and me on Instagram as well. Thanks for listening, folks, and have fun in the shop.
What you do, if you have a shoe and it's a little bit worn out.
First, step one, get a shoe.
Yeah, who has a shoe? God, Mike.
Get a shoe.
Why don't you, this is only for the extremely wealthy.
You nail it to a wall. And you put your files in it. Issue 15, right there. Fine Woodworking Magazine.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
They should have just stopped Methods of Work after that.
They should have.